Hello there, I'm Ed Butler and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC. Today, Facebook in the dock. Mark Zuckerberg faces up to senators. He says sorry, but is that enough?
He did not give up a lot of ground. He didn't say what he wanted the regulations to look like. Still, no one has been fired for this, despite everyone saying they're so sorry and they need to be better stewards of data.
So, what's next for one of the world's biggest companies?
Facebook is too big for the market. It can't regulate itself. It's an abuse of power. Facebook is a monopoly, and it does need breaking up.
How do you regulate one of the world's biggest tech firms? Business Daily from the BBC. It was, they quipped, the $3 billion testimony. That's the level to which Facebook shares managed to jump on Tuesday during Mark Zuckerberg's 5-hour testimony. The grilling of the Facebook CEO and founder by the Commerce and Judiciary Committees looked, to many investors at least, more like a light sauté. And they rewarded with him and the firm with a 5% share price hike. The hearing began with the Zuck repeating his apology for the firm's failure to protect users' data.
It's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
There were one or two eye-catching exchanges, for example, this one between Mr. Zuckerberg and Senator Dick Durbin.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world.
Sticky moments like that, though, were too few and far between, according to some critics, including Sarah Lacy. She's founder of Pando, an investigative website based in Silicon Valley.
You know, Congress did not come off well in this battle between Mark Zuckerberg and Congress. All of social media was full of jokes about how little they seem to have understood Facebook or the internet, as was evidenced in hour after hour of testimony. And I think what you're seeing from that is a lot of people kind of taking Facebook's side and saying, yeah, well, if they understand it this little, how can they regulate it? It's that thinking that has us in this position today. I think that's one of the reasons Wall Street is rewarding Mark Zuckerberg. I think he appears to have faced this on. He has openly said the buck stops with him. And he has apologized and he has answered all the questions. He did not give up a lot of ground. He didn't say what he wanted the regulations to look like. He said there was a moral responsibility for what was posted on Facebook, but he certainly didn't say there was any legal responsibility. Still, no one has been fired for this, despite everyone saying they're so sorry and they need to be better stewards of data. You know, I think it reminds me of that scene in Chicago where the attorney does the tap dance and everyone applauds.
Journalist Sarah Lacy. So that's one verdict of what happened in Congress. What should be happening to Facebook? Let's hear from a man who was there right at the start when the company was born.
I got a scholarship to go to a fancy boarding school and then on to Harvard. And there I ended up rooming with Mark Zuckerberg. And for 3 years worth of work, I ended up making nearly $500 million.
Sounds like good work if you can get it. Chris Hughes there, a small-town American guy who knew a thing or two about coding and found himself helping to develop the world's favourite social network. It may have made him very rich, but ahead of this week's hearings, he told me a reckoning was now due for Facebook.
The good news for us culturally is that we're having a moment where we're all becoming more aware of the data and information that we're creating about ourselves. And we are starting to ask really overdue questions about who owns that data, who can access it, what happens when I decide I want to leave one network and move to another, what happens when I decide I want to erase that data, what rights do I have as a user of these platforms? And so those are very big questions that a day or two of congressional testimony alone is not going to answer, nor is a little notification at the top of your newsfeed. I think that these questions are going to have to be wrestled with across the board. I think that it's got to be a conversation that happens in collaboration with not just Facebook users, but with governments, with civil society leaders, with a broad swath of people to understand how do we want to hold companies, particularly companies that have such concentrated power, accountable to make sure that our democracies continue to function as we want them to.
You say that Facebook needs to make sure users know what their data is being used for. What more should they do? How do you drive that message home?
One big step would be to be very clear about who owns what data, who has access to that data, when it's being monetized and sold, and the fact that Facebook users can use data portability tools to take it with them. That kind of user education can and should happen inside Facebook. I think it needs to happen on news and television programs. And it's got to happen again and again, not just a single notification. You know, I sort of liken it to the terms of service that all of these sites set up. I mean, you're served all this legalese, and most people just scroll to the bottom and hit accept, not really realizing exactly what they are agreeing to. I mean, we should imagine a different future where companies, when they create these relationships with users, make it much easier for the users to understand what they are agreeing to, and also consistently ask users to engage with that, not just to hit a, okay, next, close the window kind of box, but to really think it through.
Former Facebook pioneer Chris Hughes here on Business Daily from the BBC. Well, time perhaps for a quick review of all this talk about data really means. The likes of Google and Facebook don't routinely share our data with other firms, not exactly, but they certainly do use it to create targeted advertising, which they then tailor to each of us based on our online behaviour. As a result, we get their services for free, but some say we are paying ultimately in more sinister ways. Dylan Curran is a computer analyst, a self-styled privacy consultant. He's written a revealing account in the Guardian newspaper of the extent to which both Google and Facebook accumulate and retain vast amounts of data on all of us net users.
No one knew that if you go into your Facebook general settings, it's in light grey text at the bottom of the page, basically transparent, like you can barely see it, and it says download a copy. That doesn't really mean anything to you. Like, you're not going to just automatically assume that's all of your information that you've ever had stored on Facebook. And then for Google, it's google.com/takeout, which I'd also never heard of until 2 weeks ago when I went in and deliberately looked for it. And so comprehensive, you would think it would be more available to people.
Right, I have just clicked now on the first of these links that you put down, the timeline one, which is essentially ever since I first put Google onto my phone and therefore it was tracking my location, I see a map of the world and a whole series of little red dots revealing to me, and I suppose to anyone in Google who wants to know where I've been.
It's really interesting, it's fascinating for people because they have no idea where they were 5 years ago on March 14th. They have no clue, but then Google will have that. So you can sort it by year, and then you can go all time, and then if you do it by all time, it'll just show red dots just exploding across the world, basically. You're like, oh my God, like if someone had their hands on that information, it's just incredible.
Yeah, the next one is my activity. So I clicked on that now. And obviously it's starting at the most recent. I mean, this one could go on forever, couldn't it? This is literally every search I have ever attempted.
Yeah, so it's pretty much everything you've done that's in contact with a Google account. That would be your Google Maps, your Google searches, your browsing history, all the images and files you download, all the ads you view and click, all the photos you take, and then it'll have like metadata showing where you've been, when you took the picture, all of it, everything on that page. For the last however many years you've had Google on your phone.
Now, you did this and you found 5.5 gigabytes of material. That's 3 million pages of documentation, effectively. Your life story.
The staggering amount of information. It was, for instance, my search history document had over 90,000 entries. That would take me years to go through, but it was all theirs in one file. They do not believe in a delete button. That does not exist.
Basically, Google knows you better than your mum.
Oh, far better. With search history and YouTube history and that kind of thing, you really do get to the core of a person. So for instance, if you were, feeling really depressed and you didn't even tell your partner or your friends or your family, but you might Google that kind of stuff. You might look up depression symptoms, you might look up therapists. So Google would have that information and then they would be able to figure out that you are in fact depressed. Or they might even be able to use certain search activity to figure out other things. Like, for instance, there was a case in America with Walmart where Walmart actually figured out from someone's shopping habits that they were pregnant and started recommending them pregnancy services. But she had no idea she was pregnant. She just happened to have the same browsing habits as a pregnant person. When you have that much information, you can pretty much guess anything about someone.
It is extraordinary. When you actually sit here, as I now am, looking at this map of the world and this extraordinary, huge file going on for page and page, and I don't know how big it is. I haven't figured out how many gigabytes mine is. It does give you pause, doesn't it, about not just that they have this much information, but actually how I might feel about it. I mean, the whole data breach scandal has made us all think again, perhaps a little bit, about how happy we are or unhappy, or maybe we're just very relaxed. Maybe we don't really mind. What do you think?
Yes. So what I've been mostly advocating for is a digital expiry date, because we can't really compel companies not to collect this kind of information. You know, like they should have their own room to maneuver, and people should be able to consent to that kind of thing. The thing I would like is that they should not keep it for more than 3 years. There's absolutely no need to keep any of this information for more than 3 years. Within 3 years, your hobbies and interests are going to change. Your income's going to change. Your relationship status is going to change. Your friends are going to change. Everything's going to change. And the information they have 3 years ago is not going to be useful for targeting advertising towards you now. So then we can solve the problem where things can get a little more sinister in the future, where maybe some government gets control of all that information. And if you have control of 2.2 billion users worth of information on the planet, and you know everything about them for the last 10 years, that's a horrifying thought. Now that's very dystopian, and I don't know how likely that is, but that possibility is always there. So if we put in like a digital expiry date where this information is gone after 3 years, that seems like a happy compromise.
A happy compromise, according to Dylan Curran, but not nearly enough, according to some others. Shoshana Zuboff, for example, the former Harvard Business School lecturer, is scandalized by the phenomenon of data mining across the tech industry. She's written a book. She's called it The Age of Surveillance Capitalism.
Surveillance capitalists have tried to persuade us that what they're doing is just, the necessary march of technological progress. This is how the machines work. This is how machine intelligence works, and so on and so forth. That's just completely bogus. What I'm for is using the digital in ways that enhance our lives and enhance our societies and enhance our democracies without the price that we are being asked to pay, because the price we're being asked to pay is the price of our autonomy, is the price of our decision rights. Surveillance capitalists have accrued such asymmetries of knowledge, and through that, such asymmetries of power in our societies, that they really are a threat to individual freedom and to democracy in a way that we have never experienced before.
Mark Zuckerberg is before Congress this week, being grilled, being cross-questioned. Do you imagine this is going to lead to regulation?
If we're lucky, this is the beginning of a process in which society reasserts control over the digital future.
A final thought now then from one of the people who I suppose helped to force Mark Zuckerberg into the congressional crosshairs this week, Carole Cadwalladr of The Observer newspaper. She pursued the role of Facebook and the consultancy firm Cambridge Analytica in extracting and exploiting the data of those 85 million Facebook users. Carole Cadwalladr, welcome. What was your initial response then? Just first off, what you saw yesterday from the Senate.
Well, there was a huge sense of excitement, is that finally here he was, Mark Zuckerberg was arriving to answer questions. We'd had these congressional hearings last year and he'd sent along his lawyers. So I think that was a big win. I mean, as it went on, it was sort of like, oh, come on, please, can somebody ask some, more pointed questions? But at the end of it, I then thought that actually, this is symbolically important. This is that Facebook is no longer unaccountable. It is going to have to answer to lawmakers. And that I felt was actually the most important aspect of it.
What would regulation look like, do you think, if it were to be applied? I mean, a lot of people are sceptical about the American senators' intent with regard to regulation. There's a lot of division in the United States over this.
In the States, there is certainly the bigger issue about data. There is no data protection in the United States. But I think for the world, there's a bigger issue. The rest of the world has got no leverage over Facebook. There's a sort of critical responsibility in the United States. And some little laws here and there aren't enough. They're not sufficient. And Facebook is a monopoly. and it does need breaking up, I think.
So it's a monopoly, it needs breaking up. What would the rules need to be, though, with regard to data and the use of data, do you think? I mean, in rough terms.
The United States needs to have a conversation with regards to data protection. We already have better laws in Europe about that, but we have no capacity to resist Facebook because of its position in the market, because it is this monopoly. So I'm personally less interested in what the United States is going to do to protect, citizens of the United States. I'm interested in what can we do to protect citizens of the world from this vast, somewhat abusive power that's being exercised.
Are users, do you think, the general public, with you on this? Do people feel it? I mean, I'm looking at the responses we're seeing around the world, and there's a sense of outrage. There's a sense of outrage about lots of stories when they break these days, but there isn't perhaps the kind of the follow-through, the deep-seated feeling like there is something sinister at play here. Do you think that people are with your line of thinking?
I think the sort of Cambridge Analytica moment has been amazingly helpful in people understanding what can be done to their data and how creepy it is. Personal information that could be taken without your knowledge and without your consent and used in ways that you don't understand to benefit somebody like Trump, somebody like Erdogan in Turkey or wherever. So there has been a realisation that there is something going on which is not visible and we're not aware of and we can't track and we have no control over. That has been a kind of profound moment in our understanding of the way that the internet works in relation to us personally.
So if there were one rule to be applied or one regulation to be applied, it would be what?
That Facebook is too big for the market. It can't regulate itself. It's an abuse of power. It's a monopoly.
Carole Cadwalder of The Observer. Will the US Congress meaningfully regulate, as she suggests? Most have their doubts. Mr. Zuckerberg will face more questions in Congress today, but many reckon the focus could now switch to Europe, where tough new data protection rules are coming into force next month, threatening huge fines on firms like Facebook that misuse consumers' data. Could that have a knock-on effect on the US and the rest of the world? We'll see. Thanks for downloading the Business Daily podcast. We put out a brand new edition of our programme 5 days a week, so you can subscribe to us wherever you find your podcasts. Meanwhile, here's another one coming soon from the BBC World Service.
Starting on the 16th of April.
A major new podcast series.
She was laying with her head down there and her legs up here.
A woman's unidentified body. A 47-year-old mystery. Our investigation.
Search for Death in Ice Valley wherever you find your podcasts.
You can hear the preview now.
Subscribe now and you won't miss the first episode.